Well, good morning. Yes, I'm Pete Najarian. This is the Take for Market Rebellion on this Friday morning, and an unbelievable week as we've been talking about it all week. Each and every day seems to be bringing something new to us. And I'll tell you what, the movement that we have had, we've watched the volatility come in. It's really been something that's been amazing over the last couple of weeks. So the dislocation yesterday between the Dow and the Nasdaq, well, that was in play once again. And early on in the session, we were looking at a market that was getting pressed down pretty significantly to the downside. Matter of fact, about an hour and a half into the day yesterday, Dow was down about 150 points. You start to wonder and scratch your head. All right, so what's happening? What's the concerns for today? Then you look over at the Nasdaq. Actually, it's trading up about 60 or so points, but by the end of the day, we started to hear some of the rumors about Schumer and McConnell and the talks and all the rest of that. Before you knew it, we had this rip-roaring run from the final 2 hours of the day that moved to the upside that only faded a little bit towards the very end. So the Dow actually did finish in positive territory, but only up about 45 points. Meanwhile, the NASDAQ, it absolutely rocketed up towards 100 points higher. And with that, getting closer and closer to that 12,000 level once again for the NASDAQ. Now, we looked at the unemployment claims yesterday. That was part of the story. We looked at volatility that did jump up and got up over 24, actually finished the day under 23 by the time we got to the close. The amazing thing was, once again, the volumes, and the volumes continue to be there. 32.5 million contracts yesterday. Now, as I say that, I think that it's also interesting to point out again that it wasn't Apple at the top of the charts. This time it was Tesla. And Tesla, once again, had an incredible day. It actually traded about 1.5 million contracts for Tesla yesterday. As a matter of fact, Apple, about 1.1 million. NIO came up with 1.1 million. Now, keep track of that, because I'm going to get back to that later on. The fact that the electric vehicle market seems to be catching everybody, and everybody wants to be a part of this. And as you can see, they've not only just jumped in these stocks, but a lot of the option trading that has been going on continues to rise. As a matter of fact, there's a couple other names out there that you might not be as familiar with, that I'll make one of them a little bit more familiar with when we get to the very end of of what we're doing today for the broadcast. But I'll tell you what, there's been some great earnings this week. There's no doubt about that. We've been talking about all these various things that are moving the markets around. Well, the earnings week this week, when you really look at retail, the numbers themselves, at least the numbers given to us, and I'm not talking about just the reaction afterwards, I'm talking about the numbers themselves, pretty extraordinary. Whether you want to look at Target, Walmart, Home Depot, L Brands, TJX, and that matter of fact, now Ross stores, all of them really, really impressive this week. And that's something that I think is a big takeaway. We've also talked a lot about what's been going on with the housing market and what goes into that side of things as well. As a matter of fact, we had Louisiana Pacific yesterday talking about some of those unusual option activities. And so there's a lot going on underneath that. A matter of fact, Mnuchin was referring to this today, of improvements that we are seeing. But all that being said, the improvements that we aren't seeing right now is in what's going on with the virus and how that's been exploding to the upside. So early on, some of the positive leaders for the markets yesterday that were starting to pull things up a little bit. Well, it was Walmart, it was Salesforce, Moderna. You had Tesla, we had Splunk, we had Fiserv, DocuSign, a lot of different names. But some of the names that attach a little bit more closely, I would say, to what's going on when we do start to shut down, which it looks like, at least here in Minnesota, they announced that starting today at midnight, now we're going to start implementing some of the shutdown, not complete shutdowns like before, but shutdowns. So that's going to be affecting certain stocks, and we're going to start seeing that in the marketplace. We already starting to see some of that. By the end of the day yesterday, we really looked over and you saw semiconductors were leading along with the technology. That was what was really pumping up the NASDAQ yesterday for a really nice close towards the very end, as I say, up about 100 points. But the industrials actually were okay. Financials, they were pretty good. They were okay. Nothing spectacular. Materials actually moving to the upside pretty nicely. Energy was a very nice move yesterday. As a matter of fact, when you look over at some of the beta names that we talk about all the time in the OIH, wow, some incredible movement there once again. And energy continues to be something that we see on the unusual option side of things as well. Another day where we had 5 or 6 different unusual option activities that were related to energy names. So that gives you a pretty good idea of how much focus there is going in that direction. So today, relatively flat in the pre-markets. and a slight disconnect early on, just slight disconnect early on in terms of the Dow with the NASDAQ and how that was starting to move around. But again, the focus on the vaccines and also on the infection rate. And that seems to be right now more in front of us than all the politics and a lot of the other different areas that have been moving the markets. It seems like that has become the focal point once again. And as that becomes the focal point, obviously there are certain names that are going to be affected. But I have to hit a little bit more on earnings that are coming out that have come out since yesterday when we first were doing the take yesterday. FireEye, one of those names. That name, absolutely cybersecurity. What an explosive move that had, up about 12%. You had Ross Stores was up about 3% afterwards. Williams Sonoma. Some of the numbers that came out of Williams Sonoma, when you look at their digital, it was up 49% year over year. That's a pretty amazing number. And that was a stock that was up 5, 6, 7%, having a pretty nice day, at least early on. Everything that I was watching from the earnings perspective, we're having pretty decent days. A couple of misses here and there, but so early on in the pre-market, we're down about 60, 80 points, something in that sort of a range. Then all of a sudden you get to the open, we're down about 80 points. So it looked like it was fairly accurate. The NASDAQ was doing not a whole lot. First 30 minutes into the day, suddenly we're down about 130 points. That's about where we are now, an hour into the day. We're down about 130 points. As a matter of fact, the NASDAQ, which had gone into negative by about 30 points, now has moved back into the positive territory. We got volatility trading. Now, remember, on Fridays, when you get into the volatility side of things, oftentimes when you get there, you're going to be looking at something that's pricing out Saturday and Sunday as well. So it's a little bit lower number maybe than it really is, but that's because you're pricing in the future. So right now trading right around 2270, 2280 for the volatility index. So virtually unchanged so far. Now, financials, that was one of the areas that started this move to the downside when we were looking over at what was really sort of tugging on the markets, specifically on the Dow itself. JP Morgan, certainly one of those names, but the financials just in general. You look at Wells, you look at Citi, you look at Bank of New York, Discover, various names, all those names moving to the downside and in concert together, pulling down on the financial side of things. Tech, on the other hand, a little bit weaker, at least early on, some of those names, but nothing really all that terrible. But the weakness was just sort of across the board. And because of that, that's what was just pulling us down when we were down about 30, 35 points on the NASDAQ earlier on. It was Salesforce, it was Microsoft, it was Apple, Facebook, some of those names, but they were all just moving down slightly. And that was part of the movement that we were seeing there that was pulling on things. Industrials, on the other hand, were really what was pulling oftentimes when we're looking over at the Dow. You look at the industrials, you look at the financials, you look at all the various different sectors. Industrials, I was looking at Boeing, that was looking not so great early on. Dow, Caterpillar, some of those names pulling on the markets as well. And I mentioned earlier, when we're looking at some of the names, what are the names that are kind of working on days where we have a lot more focus going on back at the concerns about the virus, shutdowns, and all the rest of it? Well, the stay-at-home stocks, right? So you've got Zoom, you've got Activision, you've got EA, you've got Take-Two, all those types of stocks that are related to the stay-at-home sort of a phase. That's really what we were seeing that was actually working to the upside. Maybe that's what's really started to pull this market. When I started, we were down about 30 on the NASDAQ. We really rapidly started to move back up and now in positive territory, not by a whole lot, so 10, 15 points, something like that to the upside, but a significant difference from what we are seeing right now over at the Dow, where that's down about 100 points right now. So always want to give you guys some unusual option activity. And the unusual option activity I have today is an interesting one because this is a name that's already hit 6 separate times just this month of November with unusual option activity. And it's been pretty interesting. LI. Now, Li, Chinese electrical vehicle company. We talk about all these various names, Nikola, all these various things that come up. This is another one of those that kind of flies under the radar. A lot of people aren't paying attention to it. And I think it's something that we've seen on the unusual option side of things here at Market Rebellion for a long time, but specifically over the last 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks or so. As a matter of fact, when it first started hitting, stock was trading about 22. Well, today, stock's trading about $37 a share. And what are they buying? 3,000 of next week's expiring. So Friday of next week, the 40 strike call. So looking for even a little bit more upside to come for this name. So $1.40 to $1.80. As I mentioned, about 3,000 of these calls being bought. Now, this is a stock that's been going up and up and up and up and moving to the upside. Now, take a look at some of the competitors that are out there and you can understand what's going on. We talked about this when we were talking about the volumes themselves. there's an amazing amount of electrical vehicle companies out there, especially coming out of China, that are a part of what we are seeing into the future. And we are seeing these volumes start to grow and grow. And so that's something I think you got to keep an eye on. But also, in terms of this unusual, this name has hit and hit and hit, and they've seemed to have been right almost every time when we've seen the upside call by. No guarantees, not trying to say that, but it certainly is something that looks pretty great in terms of risk reward. Well, you're talking about 1 week, so a little bit risky. The reward potentially is there because this is a stock that has moved very, very nicely in the past when we've seen some of this unusual. So what I'm going to do right now, I promised everybody that I would try to get in here and get a couple questions answered before I go, because I got to get to the get ready at least for the halftime show today as well. So let's see. People talking about Zoom. Do you have a target for LPX? I do not right now. By the way, another stay-at-home stock, but it just triggered just now. Target. Did you see Target today? Now, we've been talking about Target for many, many years. Brian Cornell and that crew has done an absolutely amazing job. So it really isn't a company that, oh, it's just because of the pandemic and it just started now. This is a company very much like Walmart, but in a different way, that has done an amazing job of putting together the pieces to prepare themselves for the future. The future is now, and that's exactly why they are doing so well in this environment. It's why I just saw somebody the other day saying, well, it might be in front of itself. It's probably a little bit overpriced and all the rest of it. I'm not so sure about that. And the reason I say that is take a look at what their most recent earnings just this week. Take a look at those numbers. Those numbers are probably not consistently sustainable numbers, but many of those numbers are. And when you look at the margins, that is the big key. That's something we've been talking about for a while now. So I'm going to go quickly through this. Baba, thinking of vertical call spread. If you're looking at names like Baba and Amazon and some of these names where you've got names that have volatility, but they've also got names where you're talking about high dollar amount stocks, oftentimes spreads are the way to approach a lot of these names because the expense of the options themselves just becomes overwhelming at times. So oftentimes you can, especially in the environment that we're in, where you can spread it off. You're buying one lower strike, selling an upper strike. That's a great strategy. So I would agree with that. I see that question coming in from Jack. Restoration Hardware, 52-week highs, 3 out of the last 5 days. Can they sustain this climb? Those numbers are unbelievable. Now, again, we talk about what's going on with people during this whole pandemic and while people were staying at home and people going to Home Depot, people doing all these different various things. This is one of those names that falls into that category, right? I mean, when you're really looking around and you're trying to see what people are doing. Now, the amazing part for me is the cost is there and people are still somehow managing to be able to go out as they're doing some of the home improvements and all the rest of it and go into Restoration Hardware. We all know that is not cheap, but it's amazing. And this is a company that has done very, very well in a many, many different ways over decades. So I think this is something that is it overpriced? Probably getting a little bit inflated now, but it's actually the performance is probably due to the fact that they have produced and they just did once again. So that's been pretty great. I'm looking real quick just to see if there's any others that I could get real fast for you. Target for DraftKings in the short term. That's the last one I'll do, and then I got to run. DraftKings has been an amazing stock, and we've seen that huge move to the upside, got up into the low 60s, really amazing run, and then all of a sudden the secondary and all the different news and everybody started getting a little bit more nervous about it. Then some of the sports had some of the issues that they had. I still think this is a name I think they're the front runner, and because of that, I think that they have the opportunity to continue to have unbelievable strength and growth, and I think they're going to continue to gain market share. That's my take on DraftKings. In terms of a price target, I'm not sure that I have one. I own the stock. What I do against the stock on a fairly consistent basis, I've talked about this for a long time, 5 to 10% out of the money upside calls is what I'm usually selling, and I'm trying to sell those somewhere with a month or maybe even a little bit less time if possible. But the implied volatilities in this are incredible. So the amount of premium you're able to get by selling upside calls in this name is more than you would normally see in most other stocks. I can guarantee you that. Very, very high implied volatility stock. So that gives you the opportunity to use that. And that's why I do trade the options here and there, but most often I've been in the stock itself for a long period of time and just selling calls against it, and occasionally doing something we call a stupid trade, which is I'm long stock and long calls. That has happened too, but back to the spreading. that's where you put on call spreads as well, because these options, because of the implied volatilities, if you can spread that off against something else that maybe even has a higher implied volatility, that gives you an opportunity there as well. Folks, have a great day of trading. I will see you on Monday.